Goldman Sachs has raised their gold target to $2,900 an ounce by early 2025. Call the proud Americans of the Patriot Gold Group today before it's too late. Mention the Still Report, and you'll always get best-in-class service from Patriots Protecting Patriots. Patriot Gold Group has the no fee for life IRA, where your IRA or 401k can be in physical gold and silver on qualifying rollovers. Call 888-869-9656 for a free investor guide today. Patriot Gold Group is Consumer Affairs' top-rated gold IRA dealer 7 years in a row. Call 888-869-9656. Good evening. I'm still reporting on the con again. I have rewritten this report, which I had to take down due to an unprecedented error, which eliminated the first 2 minutes of the previous report. That gave me the chance to rewrite a bit anyway. The Constitutional Convention thing, also known as the Convention of States, just will not go away, despite the fact this is nothing but a leftist gambit aimed at the very heart of what makes the United States special among the nations of the world. I've been reporting on this issue since 1985. That's 40 years ago. A full 11 years before I directed the Money Masters in 1996 and started pushing hard on monetary reform. But CONCOM just keeps coming back. Here is the key nugget of information that you should explore in depth before you stick your neck out to support this risky Convention of States gambit. Despite lots of assertions to the contrary, the convention cannot be held to a single issue. It will become a runaway convention, according to no less an authority than former Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, Warren Burger. In a January 30th, 1987 speech in Detroit, he said, "There is no way to put a muzzle on a constitutional convention. Congress will be in complete control of the convention once convened. They can even appoint themselves as the convention delegates. They can even change the basic rules laid out in Article 5 of our current Constitution. Why? Because this is exactly what Congress did in 1787. Their mission was only to modify the existing U.S. Constitution, then called the Articles of Confederation, which had existed from 1781 to 1789. Instead of simply modifying the articles, it tossed the entire document overboard and started fresh. That set a legal precedent for what direction a new convention can take, and more than likely would take. Unfortunately, today, Congress is not populated with well-meaning statesmen of the caliber that existed in the late 1700s. It is heavily influenced by big-money lobbyists. How much lobbyist money do you think the CCP would offer to eliminate our Second Amendment, which protects our right to own guns? The CCP would certainly start the bidding at billions of dollars towards that effort. In the last decade, several states have seen this problem and have withdrawn earlier CONCON calls. Others continue to insist that they can hold the convention to a single issue. However, to some states, that single issue is term limits for Congress. Others have passed CONCON calls for a balanced budget amendment. 20 states have issued CONCON calls for a right-to-life amendment. What a hot mess this would be. The truth is that we're lucky to have the Constitution which we currently have, along with the Bill of Rights, which have made this country the most free, sovereign nation in history. To open the door to wholesale change in this current hyper-divisive environment would be suicidal. Constitutional scholars down through the years have raised this alarm to opening the entire document to wholesale change once again. Despite the protestations of CONCON advocates, who have inserted drastic prohibitions into fresh con calls in order to calm our fears, such as demanding criminal penalties for those voting for the passage of more than one amendment. Legal scholars generally believe the risks far outweigh the advantages of a new constitutional convention. There are literally hundreds of quotes that could be used, but here are just a few. Former Secretary of Defense Melvin Laird was so concerned he wrote an article in the Washington Post in which he outlined the dangers of a con. There is no certainty that our nation would survive a modern-day convention with its basic structures intact and its citizens' traditional rights retained. Those who think a con could be restricted to just one issue would do well to consider Secretary Laird's analysis. The only precedent we have for a constitutional convention took place in Philadelphia in 1787. That convention, it must be remembered, broke every legal constraint designed to limit its power and agenda. The dean of the William and Mary Law School, former U.S. Senator William B. Spong, wrote in 1987, "It is doubtful that a modern-day convention could be limited to a single issue. There is no guarantee that once the delegates are convened, Pandora's box would not be opened by groups concerned with a single issue or special interest, placing at risk all of the hard-fought language of our Constitution, including the Bill of Rights." Can you imagine the chaos that would ensue under our current conditions? To prove the inanity of such proposals, we can even go back in history to the father of our present Constitution, James Madison. In a private letter written to George Lee Tuberville on November 2, 1788, Madison wrote that if another constitutional convention were held, it would be courted by the most violent partisans on both sides. It would no doubt contain individuals of insidious views who might have a dangerous opportunity of sapping the very foundations of the fabric. Having witnessed the difficulties and dangers experienced by the first convention, I should tremble for the result of a second meeting. The leftists have historically always been the driving force of opening the Constitution to wholesale change. In 1913, as President Woodrow Wilson was implementing the Federal Reserve System, which would eventually enslave this nation in debt, Wilson's closest advisor, Colonel Edward House, advised the president that the existing Constitution was the product of 18th century minds and should be scrapped and rewritten. Fortunately, that did not happen. Throughout the years, internationalists have always supported the con as the best way to destroy the importance of national sovereignty as a stabilizing force in international relations. In 1947, two prominent Council on Foreign Relations members, Norman Cousins and James P. Warburg, formed something called the United World Federalists to try to merge the U.S. into the United Nations. This group actually got 27 state legislatures to pass resolutions demanding a con to expedite and ensure U.S. participation in a world government. 3 years later, by the end of 1950, most states had repealed the resolutions once the consequences of a con became clear to that generation. In 1954, Senator William Jenner warned that the con was not dead but only sleeping. We have operating within our government and political system another body representing another form of government, a bureaucratic elite which believes our Constitution is outmoded. All the strange developments in foreign policy agreements may be traced to this group who are going to make us over to suit their pleasure. In 1974, the same year President Nixon resigned, Rexford Guy Tugwell, one of the academic liberals from the old FDR brain trust of the 1930s, published a book called The Emerging Constitution. He claimed that our old Constitution was too cumbersome and too difficult to deploy the changes they desired. It proposed something called a Constitution for the New States of America. The new state's constitution proposed to replace the 50 states with between 10 and 20 regional new states, which would not be states at all, but rather subservient departments of the national government. Shockingly, the federal government would be empowered to abridge freedom of expression, communication, movement, and assembly in a declared emergency. In other words, the Bill of Rights would be discarded. In addition, private ownership of guns would be prohibited. The bearing of arms or the possession of lethal weapons shall be confined to the police, members of the armed forces, and those licensed under law. Freedom of religion would no longer be considered a right, but a revocable privilege. In addition, the new state's constitution would give the President of the new states of America a 9-year term and allow him to appoint most of the 100 senators to lifetime terms. The House of Representatives would have 100 members elected at large as a single ticket with the President and Vice President, also for 9-year terms. In the 1970s, the Ford Foundation spent $25 million over 10 years to produce and promote the new state's constitution. In late 1975, something called the World Affairs Council sponsored the preparation of yet another document called a Declaration of Interdependence. Written by Council on Foreign Relations member Henry Steele Commager, it was meant to replace the Declaration of Independence in time for its 200th birthday at a ceremony in Philadelphia in 1976. It included the following: 2 centuries ago, our forefathers brought forth a new nation. Now we must join with others to bring forth a new world order. To establish a new world order of compassion, peace, justice, and security, it is essential that mankind free itself from the limitations of national prejudice and acknowledge that all people are part of one global community. This was signed by more than 100 senators and congressmen. However, after the Declaration of Interdependence became the subject of controversy, many of the legislators withdrew their support. The error in logic, though subtle, is worth repeating. As predicted in biblical prophecy, once the power vested in nations is transferred to a single world authority, we can be sure that the reign of the Antichrist will begin. Since 1975, as many as 40 draft versions of the revised Constitution have been prepared. By 1984, a more toned-down version was presented by a group known as the Committee on the Constitutional System, CCS. The CCS proposal includes the following: permit the President to dissolve Congress when he thinks Congress is intractable and call for new congressional elections. Eliminate the 22nd Amendment, which limits a president to 2 terms. Reduce the cost of presidential and congressional elections by holding them at irregular intervals so that the date would not be known very far in advance, similar to the British parliamentary system. The true intentions of this group, however, was revealed by my favorite anti-con quote made by James McGregor Burns, a professor and historian who in 1984 wrote the following analysis of the situation for CCS members. Let us face reality. The framers of the Constitution have simply been too shrewd for us. They have outwitted us. They designed separate institutions that cannot be unified by mechanical linkages, frail bridges, or tinkering. If we are to turn the founders upside down, we must directly confront the constitutional structure they erected. Henry Hazlitt, a chief con proponent and advisor to the National Taxpayers Union, addressed this vexing problem of the Constitution being too difficult to amend in his 1974 book, A New Constitution Now. The very minimum change necessary if our Constitution is to have any real flexibility is a change from our present method of constitutional amendment itself. Fast forward to the present day. Opening the entire Constitution to wholesale change, which is a possibility, is way too risky, especially since there is an excellent alternative in Article 6 of the existing Constitution. Rather than trying to rein in big government by altering the Constitution with Article 5, citizens and lawmakers should be reining in big government by enforcing the Constitution with Article 6. Article 6 states that only those laws that are made in pursuance of the Constitution shall be the supreme law of the land. That is what is known as the Supremacy Clause. In other words, any laws passed by Congress that are not made in accordance with the Constitution are not the supreme law of the land, rendering them invalid. Why do we never hear about this? Whenever the federal government passes unconstitutional acts, it is up to the states to intervene and defend the Constitution on the grounds of the Article 6 Supremacy Clause. State and local officials, in keeping with their oath to the Constitution, are to ignore such acts and only enforce those that are actually made in pursuance of the Constitution. Yes, your state and even local officials have this power by invoking the Supremacy Clause. So let's protect this God-given framework of freedom, our Constitution, at all costs, but do so by replacing officials who are not protecting the Constitution as per their oath and office, a much safer and swifter remedy. For more quotes of notable constitutional experts, attorney Mark Bork assembled this excellent video for state legislators 16 years ago. Click on this link in the description box below. I'm still reporting from just outside the citadel of world freedom. Good day.